GMO. When we first came to this valley, the isolation bothered us. In the beginning, I came for my craft, to be a writer. But after years with no human contact, I began to enjoy the silence and the solitude. The soaring mountains and the purity of the mountain streams seemed to wash away all my regrets. The love and company of my lady in this beautiful spot was like a healing balm. I had never loved a woman like this. There was an innocence about our relationship that I had not experienced since high school. She is strong, independent, and also deeply sensitive and tender. Our bond was and is deeply powerful. The days went by in perfect sameness. She worked in the large garden, tending the fruit and vegetables. I meditated and worked on a number of book projects. Each day we awoke to the sound of songbirds and the tapping of woodpeckers echoing in the ancient forest. We made a commitment to each other and to our spirit to meditate together each morning, side by side. The sun streaming in between the gently moving leaves, we would face the window. We would cook our breakfast and sit together each morning. After breakfast, talking about our thoughts and feelings, working through any misunderstandings, musing about our serene life, or just chatting about small things. As the sun came over the crest of the mountains, she turned to her garden and I turned to my computer. Each day at lunchtime, we eagerly dropped our separate projects and worked together as a couple, cooking to make the big meal of the day. The smell of fresh baked bread and stir-fried vegetables filled the little house, each morsel of food infused with love. Then after a rest, we went back to the chores we loved. Dinner was a simple affair, fresh bread and homemade cheese. Table scraps were thrown out for the chickens, and of course each evening, Bessie, the sweet-natured Swiss cow, had to be milked. Without electricity, bedtime was early, but neither of us complained. We snuggled under the quilts, kissing tenderly. After working out in the mountain airs, sleep was deep and dreamless. With the completion of my book, the time had come to make a trip down to town to send the manuscript off to the publisher. The years of sweet solitude made it hard to leave this sunny valley, even for just a day. Rising early was not a problem. Bessie was milked again, and the battery put back in the car. To our surprise, the car started on the first try. After 21 miles on a small dirt road, we made a sharp right turn into a small paved country road. In the winter, these roads were impassable, but on a day like today, it was a sheer pleasure to drive across the steep mountain pass. All the way up, we were surrounded by the sounds of a mountain stream rushing by. After 2 years away, we entered Jasper. Entering Jasper was a shock. We felt like a tourist on a foreign planet, gawking at the buildings, slowing down to look at the latest model cars and the latest fashion trends. We remember the location of the post office, and of course the large Canadian flag was a strong clue. Our senses, long used to the deep forest, were suddenly impacted with the smell of humans. The smell of cologne, underarm deodorant, body sweat, greasy food, people's breath, and the smell of car exhaust all seemed so intense and foreign. The post office line seemed unusually slow, but we were in no particular rush. we were both surprised that a young, mentally challenged man was the post office clerk. It seemed like an overwhelming burden for someone so mentally challenged. He was friendly and chatty, but he seemed to be making lots of mistakes, giving the wrong change, putting on the wrong stamps, or even forgetting to put any stamps on the packages. The patrons also seemed to be mentally impaired in some way. They could not make sense of the currency and seemed to be unable to count their change. But after a long wait, we finally got the manuscript off. I made sure he actually put the stamps on the envelope before I left. After the manuscript was sent off, we went to the supermarket for rice, salt, and the big treat of the year, 2 chocolate bars. As we approached the supermarket, we were both surprised at the appearance. It seemed run down, with dirty, streaked windows and assorted trash and debris in the parking lot. The automatic door did not open, so we had to push hard on the heavy metal door to open it. And inside seemed like bedlam. Boxes and crates of food were spilled on the floor, and clerks in dirty, stained uniforms were slowly trying to sort out the items, often stepping on them as they did. As we walked by, 2 of the clerks stopped what they were doing and wanted to talk. Both of them seemed to be somehow mentally off. The older man asked us if we wanted to buy some cans of beets. About 20 beet cans were scattered on the floor. The other shorter man had slurred speech and wanted to talk about a song he heard on the radio. We listened for a while, but politely excused ourselves, stepped over the cans of beets, corn, and corned beef hash. The store shelves seemed to be stocked in some kind of random order. Packages of canned goods were scattered on the shelves. The first shelf had rice check, cooking oil, ripped bags of flour, a spilled container of cinnamon, a package of Swiss cheese that should have been refrigerated, that had begun to turn blue with mold, and a spilled case of toothpicks, which not only covered the shelves, but also had been spilling out into the floor. We went down the next aisle, and the chaos and disorganization was the same. Aluminum baking pans, a gallon of milk that had gone rancid, 2 boxes of cookies that someone had ripped open, 2 bags of dog food, half-open case of toilet paper, and at the end of the aisle, an empty shelf save for a ripped open bag of lentils. We came to a cluster of clerks trying to open a cardboard case. They seemed to be in no hurry and smiled and greeted us like long-lost friends. Each one seemed to talk and seemed in a way that they were mentally impaired. One wanted to talk about a puppy she saw. The other wanted to make small talk about the weather. One clerk was sitting on the floor with his fingers in his mouth, gently rocking back and forth. My lady tugged at my arm. "Let's get out of here," she said. "Something is wrong with this place." As we walked down the aisle towards the front, I spotted a 50-pound bag of rice under a pile of broken open cases of paper towels. We got hold of the edge and we pulled it out while the clerks just watched. I put it on my shoulder and took it to the front register. We seemed to be the only customers in the store. A petite young girl came to the register and smiled at us. She wanted to make small talk, and we listened to it for a while, but then I asked if she could ring us up, and her face darkened. She asked an older man who was there to bag groceries to get the manager, and he scurried off while we waited. In about 5 minutes, an older man with bent glasses and uncombed hair came to the register. He said, "Oh, what can I do for you today?" And I said, I just want to pay for a bag of rice. He looked worried and said he would get a price list and be right back. The checkout clerk and the older bagging man shuffled restlessly and avoided eye contact with us. My lady asked the older man how he was doing, and he flashed a smile and began to talk about a goldfish named Alfie. He said, "You would like Alfie. He is a cute goldfish." The manager came back with a handful of crumpled paper, and with his bent glasses tried to find a price for rice. I can tell he was worried and confused. He shuffled through his papers for a while and said, "Look," I said, "look, how about if I give you $20 for the rice?" The manager put down his papers and started laughing and said that was a great idea. The clerk and the bagging man smiled, and everyone started talking at the same time. I handed over a 20 and put the bag of rice on my shoulder, and my lady and I walked to the door. Once again, the automatic door was broken, so we had to pry open the door to get out. When we got to the curb, my lady said, "What was going on in that store? Do they only hire people who are mentally impaired? This makes no sense." We put the rice into the car, and I remembered just then the promise of chocolate. I didn't want to go back into the store. Let's go to the convenience store across the street and pick up 2 chocolate bars. My lady just smiled and linked her arm with mine. The convenience store seemed to be in total chaos. Bags of chips were half ripped open. Chips were scattered on the floor. Cases of soft drinks were stacked in the middle of the aisle and were partially ripped open, with some cans missing. The cash register was setting open with cash spilling out. There was no order to the cash drawer at all. Random bills were stuck in random slots. 2 rolls of nickels were spilled on the counter. An older man who was mentally impaired was drinking coffee and sitting on a half-open case of toilet paper, which was being crushed in by his weight. He smiled and waved at us. "Take whatever you want," he said. "You don't have to pay. The cash register is broken." My lady and I looked at each other. "What's going on?" I whispered. In the front of the checkout counter, there was a broken open case of chocolate bars. I reached in and found 2 and took them out and placed $2 on the counter. The clerk remained sitting on the crushed box of toilet paper, and when we opened the door, the wind blew the money off the counter. We couldn't wait to get out of town and back to our cabin. On the long drive back, we both sat in silence. After 4 years of living together in the deep woods, we no longer felt the need to be constantly speaking, but spoke only when moved to do so. Both of us were pondering what we had just seen. Before we reached the cabin, I had remembered reading an article about how, in the process of testing genetically modified food through experiments on rats, they found that genetically modified food caused retardation. But the FDA had approved it anyhow.